Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, October 19th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Penn State game is in 2 days. The game against Michigan in 37 days. Boy, those two games just seems like two pretty consequential games for this year's Ohio State football team and the national college football scene on the whole. We're not going to be talking about those necessarily. We're going to be taking a little bit of a look back at last weekend's win over Purdue for the Buckeyes, maybe a little bit about what it's going to mean moving forward with the Nittany Lions on deck. And we're going to be doing it with our buddy Ross Fulton of BuckeyeHuddle.com. He is our X's and O's guru. Ross, I mean, before we get started on that just looked like a more functional Ohio State offense in a lot of different ways on Saturday against Purdue. How much of that do you chalk up to Ohio State was getting better at stuff, and how much of that was Purdue had some guys missing and just is not quite up to the standards of what Ohio State is going to be facing this weekend against Penn State?
Yeah, and I mean, ironically, too, because Ohio State was missing quite a few guys, again, at the skill position. So, between several running backs and Emeka Egbuka. I think even putting aside like the opponent, they did a very nice job tying together the game plan, the run and pass game. We'll give some examples of that, but they were almost entirely gap run based. I mean, they did mix in some mid zone. There's very little of like stretch from pistol. And obviously I think some of that is Purdue plays this sort of unique base five man front and a pretty aggressive cover one with an extremely deep safety. So you obviously have to game plan for your opponent. And that makes it tough to get double teams on zone with, the three, particularly like the three large defensive linemen inside the tackles. But nevertheless, like I thought, as well, we can talk about like the use of counter tray, the use of a lot of same side pin and pull. And then they tied those things together nicely. Like, they did play action in the pocket off of those concepts. They faked the orbit motion. They used several, RPOs and reliefs, like sort of the return motion by Marvin Harrison. They threw a couple times, the quick out to Fleming against soft cover one. So I think they did a nice job of tying things together. And obviously, I guess we'll see whether that continues going forward in terms of the types of plays they were using and how much of that was just dependent on what Purdue was doing. But I think for the run game in particular, like I think it was a big step forward in terms of doing things that they can do well.
All right, so the first play we're going to look at, this is a good one because when I watched it live, I thought, how on earth did they get Marvin Harrison wide open in the end zone? That seems like something that, Purdue has probably done enough scouting to know that, hey, number 18 is pretty good. You're going to want to have him covered. He ended up singled on this one, and they ended up later on showing a nice little replay on the broadcast that sort of showed some of it. But how did Marvin Harrison get so open on that first touchdown?
Yeah, I mean, they've been, obviously with Egbuka out, they played Harrison quite a bit in the slot, although they've been doing that more and more the past couple of weeks. They did the same against Maryland, too, before Egbuka's injury. So, they're moving Marvin around quite a bit, both with motion and formation-wise, and people motioning around him to change where his alignment is. But again, like Purdue is not a team that's going to be interested in trying to bracket or double for the most part. I mean, they ran cover one, guesstimating over 80% of the time, or cover zero, like this play. This is flag cover zero. It's a very classic red zone concept where you run a double ends and then a corner route from the slot. And a lot was made about McCord throwing off his back foot, particularly early, but this is cover zero. Like you can see up front, they do not have enough blockers for the 7 men that Purdue is bringing. And that's actually a technique that they teach. CJ Stroud had to do it several times against Georgia last winter. So he, you're basically, you have to count on your quarterback to get it off to buy himself time to get the throw off before that unblocked rusher gets home. And obviously, you have to take advantage, to your point, of if you get Marvin Harrison singled up with no safety help, most times he's going to win. He was open quite a bit throughout the game. Obviously, they had some drop issues that would have been an even better day for McCord. I think you kind of have to assume that's a one-off with the game sort of getting out of hand and the weather. in Purdue, but but again, so they had to take advantage of one-on-one opportunities downfield, and they did that pretty often. And I will note that they'll we can talk about this more later, but they will face another aggressive defense from Penn State. I mean, Manny Diaz is he's very blitz happy, to the point of sometimes doing things that are almost unsound, or will provide opportunities, whether it's downfield or in the screen game. So, it probably was a good tune up, not exactly a 1-for-1, but a lot of the same sort of ethos, if you will, from Purdue's defense, and is also reflected in what they'll face from Penn State.
All right. And next up, this is something you mentioned earlier, the orbit motion, just showing the orbit motion and then doing stuff off of that. And this is one of the plays. This is one of not this specific play, but the play call here, GT counter. That's something that you mentioned on Twitter during the game as something that they have done pretty well this year, and they were showing more of it on Saturday against Purdue. So can you explain what we're looking at? What are we talking about when you talk about GT counter?
Yeah, so we'll split up here a couple things. So the orbit motion is, again, becoming a concept that they're increasingly using, and you see it a lot of places. The Miami Dolphins are using it a lot right now, and it gives you this ball handling aspect that it sort of harkens back to like the wing tee, where you're hiding the ball and you got guys going in different directions, and and they have two guys in Xavier Johnson and Ibuka who they're happy to give the ball to on that orbit motion as a lead outside zone play. So you have the actual base play itself, and then they build off of it. And so here, and especially with Purdue playing cover one, again, like by using the orbit motion, you're pulling essentially who would be sitting in the slot there over Johnson out of the play, because he's running and chasing the orbit motion. And then GT counter, so that just is a way of saying the guard and tackle are the ones pulling on a counter tray. And, they ran this quite a bit, both to the boundary and the field. And I just think, we talked about last week, like they did not have a good rep of it against Maryland. But other than that, I mean, I think it's been their most consistent run play this year. Like Travion Henderson's, 60-plus yard touchdown run against Notre Dame came off this play. Their guards and even their tackles, frankly, have looked pretty good pulling, particularly with the more reps they get, the better they're getting on their pass, and then have been pretty athletic at the point of attack. Here, Purdue tries to crash down on it, and it creates bounce opportunities outside. And then later in the game, they tried to box it, and Dallin Hayden was able to cut the football upfield. But again, so what Purdue is doing, it certainly lends itself to running counter. Like Purdue had struggles against counter this year, but nevertheless, this has to remain a staple. Ironically, after the game, Ryan Day talked about with Hayden's entrance, they were running day one install plays, which I wouldn't necessarily think of like GT counter and same side pin and pull as like their day one install, but maybe that's a sign that that was their plan all along, was to become increasingly reliant on gap plays. And, again, I mean, Dallin Hayden, after ironically being asked about it last week, was thrown into the action, and it's hard to dispute, every time he gets the opportunity, his vision is pretty stellar in terms of reading blocks and setting things up and turning 5 into 7 and 3 into 5 and the like. So will be interesting to see how that works out going forward. I mean, I think at this point it's sort of no fault of any of their own, but Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams have been hurt for good portions of their career, so it's kind of hard to count on who exactly is going to be available on a week-to-week basis. So, at this point, they're pretty lucky to have Dallin Hayden there, even if he is their, in their minds, their fourth running back.
And after the game, Ryan Day talked about Dallin Hayden and brought up protection. He just used the word protection when he talked about, still some work to do, which I sort of interpreted as, and that's why he might not be the starting running back next week, even though he's, looked pretty darn good and was pretty effective at keeping them on schedule against Purdue. Is that something you've noticed with him? I know there have not been a lot of reps to really judge. Is that something you've picked up at all watching Dallin Hayden this year?
Yeah, there were a couple plays against Purdue where Purdue brought a boundary corner blitz and he did not see it. And, about got McCord leveled from the backside, Kyle both times was able to get rid of it. But yes, I do think they probably have some ongoing pass protection concerns with him. I mean, that's probably partially reps. I mean, he's also obviously not as big of a guy as Chip Trayanum is, who is going to be pretty stout in pass protection. And so, there are ways around that, obviously, by like partitioning when people are in the game. But then again, like they're going to have to throw against Penn State. Like this run, the run game was certainly improved. I like the concepts they're using. We talked about this last week. Like they picked up a lot of what we were saying. So it's a good thing, I guess, that the coaches are seeing things the same way with, more counter tray, more buck sweep. They ran that crack sweep several times. And so like they're getting the ball in space. Again, like if Henderson is back, like it benefits him to get the ball in space or like being able to bounce counter tray. But like, I don't think we should just assume that they're going to be able to run the football against Penn State. And like, in fact, against Purdue, they pass more on standard downs. Like the balance was a little bit more 50-50 than it had been in earlier games. So like, I think that was also a positive sign. And like, I think they're going to have to continue to crank up the passing game and the RPOs on early downs on Saturday.
They have found some creative ways to solve other issues. One of the creative things was Devin Brown in short yardage and goal line, having him come in off the bench and kind of be the power running quarterback. We sort of wondered, why are they not just running Kyle McCord or running just QB sneaks or just shoving him across the line? And they had a little bit of a creative solution to this, bringing in Devin Brown. One time it worked. He ran someone over at the goal line. One time it didn't work. The guy who he tried to run over the goal line popped the ball free. But I mean, this feels like a creative solution. What did you think about that?
Yeah, it'll be interesting going forward. I to me, like the amount of concepts they use with it shows that like this is something they've been working on. And so like, the play that we're going to go through here is actually, it looks like a zone read, but it's actually not. It's called pop out. And what it is essentially they're faking a read, but really Brown is just going to follow the running back as his lead blocker. And they're essentially wedge blocking it. And they're going to, essentially go around the end. So it's kind of taking advantage, like we talked about, like against Notre Dame, for instance, like when they wedge blocked and they got pressure off the edge. It's in some ways a response to that, to take advantage of teams trying to pinch down. It's always one of those things is trying to guess, like, did they do this purposely the week before Penn State to just give them something to prepare for? Is this like a package going forward? I mean, I tend to lean towards the latter. I mean, I kind of wondered earlier in the season, like why they continued to feel so strongly about Devin Brown as a runner. And like, they have a lot of read run concepts or QB run concepts in the game, like that we've seen with him already. And I kind of get it after the game, I guess, Ryan Day, I think correctly, is like, he's a big, strong guy. So like, especially at the goal line, like you're not talking about like putting in a small, quick quarterback. Like you're talking about kind of like going the bulldozer route. So they ran the pop out. They ran the lead outside zone. I mean, we did see Kyle McCord. We did see, the quarterback sneak push. So I think he can do that. He kept on a pin and pull zone read, or pin and pull read, I should say, and gained 9 yards. So I don't think it's not that McCord can't run. I think it's just that like Brown's a thicker guy. And so it kind of, especially near the goal line, sort of gives them an advantage of being able to, obviously gain a body in the run game, but also be able to bowl someone over at the half-yard line if you need to.
All right. And then the last one this was the second touchdown pass to Cade Stover during the course of the game. Came kind of late in the third quarter, right after the long pass down to Carnell Tate. If you were playing along in the home version, by the way, if you do want to watch the video with all the plays from the highlights from the game, you can do that on the Huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But Ross, go ahead and run us through this last play.
Yeah, again, I think this goes to our initial discussion, which is like, the offense being married together and tying concepts in the run and the pass game. And like, I use this example because I do think they did a good job of play actioning off the run concepts they were using, and not just bootlegs too, like in the pocket. And they ran this several times. So here they're faking actually a GH counter. So not quite the same as GT counter, but And I should note again, like you have G Scott as the other puller sort of protecting the backside. And they, again, use quite a bit of 12 personnel on Saturday. They ran counter Trey a lot with 12 personnel, and here they're faking and using heavy play action. So, that seems to continue to be something they want to, do 20 to 30 plays a game. But, then they can sort of, it's essentially like kind of a crossing route to Stover. It's almost a throwback. Like the action's going one way and he's going to hit it back. And obviously you have Harrison running off the coverage. Again, solid against cover one where your linebackers are responsible for your tight end. But, obviously Stover is a weapon in the passing game. And, they're going to continue to be able to rely on these concepts. But the more that they can, again, make their run plays look like pass plays and tie the stuff together, and, especially with heavier personnel or when they're like under center and pistol, I think the better off they'll be going forward and have these sort of opportunities for explosive plays off the run game.
All right, so there was your offensive show. Looking back at the Purdue game, we're going to have Ross on tomorrow to do a defensive show. There was some good news on that front for Ohio State as well. Some new, just like the offense, maybe some new players that sort of emerging for the Ohio State defense. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. It's Penn State week. What are we going to do? We're going to do an extra show for you. Just because it's Penn State week, we'll have a separate show with Ross talking all about the, more looking forward at the Penn State game in particular. In case you're wondering, why did they not talk about the Penn State game that much? Patience. We'll get there. It is a busy week. We got a lot of stuff coming for you. We got a lot of stuff for you at BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. If you want to talk more about football with Ross, that is a great place to do it. We got our whole team of X's and O's guys there. We post these shows. We try to post these shows a little early there, so you get a little bit of extra time to watch them, a little bit of extra time to talk to our X's and O's guys there on our Huddle board. It's a members-only board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We also, as I mentioned earlier, do post these with some of the game highlights there as well. Just a little added bonus for our members. Trying to make these work for both the YouTube audience and also our member audience. Trying to keep things a little more general so you get the normal dose of Ross here, but also you can get a little more on the Huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So hope to see you there. We will be back tomorrow with a whole nother show. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.